It's like that's like the question of what do we mean by value, right? If you ever want to confuse a Marxist, just basically sit about him or her down and say, "Tell me about value," and then come back 2 weeks later, they'll still be talking. As to what capitalism is, so one way to think about capitalism is the way that Karl Polanyi, the Hungarian historian and kind of economist from the 19th century and the mid 20th century, thought about it, which was the commodification of everything, the creation of everything for sale value rather than use value, and the rise of one big market that is completely interconnected. So that's one way of thinking about it. The updated version of that is probably Branko Milanovic's book on capitalism, sort of as the only game in town. And I used to spend a lot of time thinking about what this thing was, and then I just finally realized that I didn't need to, right? So here's how I think about it. The following is absolutely true. Markets and market exchange and very complex market societies have existed for thousands of years. The Romans had mortgage markets, right? The French at the time of the Revolution and the era of paper money had derivatives, right, floating around. So we can be quite sophisticated in this. And, use value versus exchange value and all that, I'm not sure that they really work as concepts. Are markets prevalent? Yeah. Are they useful? Yes. Do people use them? Yes. Are they great ways of passing information around and all the rest of it? Yes, absolutely. And the form that we have now is one that works on a kind of linear process. And here's what I mean by this. You have X, you want to turn it into Y. You may or may not add value in the process, and then you end up with a ton of waste. And that kind of linear version of capitalism and markets has been powering us for about 200 years. I think that that's coming to its end. And in fact, given the need for a green transition, it is coming to its end. So in opposition to the sort of the Branko view of the world, you'd have the Kate Raworth view of the world as the donut. Now, I like that as a metaphor, but in terms of the practicalities of building the donut, Branko had a couple of nice tweets on this where he just did back of the envelope calculations and said, if you want to bring up the bottom to even halfway up the OECD, you basically have to take half of the OECD's wealth and give it to the bottom. This would be the largest redistribution project in human history. It's just never going to happen. But I'm not sure you have to think about it that way. I think we can think about a different form of capitalism, one that people who talk about, which is related to the donut stuff, but is different, the circular economy. The whole idea of treating waste no longer as waste, of thinking about these as closed loop systems, of going to flows rather than linear processes. And the fact that you have things like large mining companies around the world, for example, thinking about just stopping mining because the grades are so low now and the technology is better that they can go back and mine all the waste that they dug out of the ground. Right, so you can go there rather than go further down, shows that there's a way in which we can get much better at this. Like no one's really ever cracked recycling. If you do, right, when you think about plastic recycling through bacteria, all the rest of it, right, then the gains you can get in this are enormous. And then you can do these scale tricks whereby you could have closed loop systems interacting at different levels, which is much, much more of a kind of complex systems, natural systems, biological systems way of thinking about capitalism and modeling it and doing it, rather than the kind of 19th century equilibrium engineering approach, which I think has really reached the end of its tether. So long-winded answer to say essentially, capitalism is what capitalism is, but the form that we've been using has hit the buffers. What we now need to do is get off a kind of a linear process model into a much more circular model, and then work at different scales of deployment at firms, at industries, at households to make that work and become more sustainable. And that's part of what we'll have going forward. Now, if we crack this, we will still have capitalism because I will have stuff and you will sell stuff and we will exchange through markets, but it'll be a very different one. And that's what's important.